Hey guys, tonight we're dropping you into a medieval forest camp with nothing but the skills people actually had between the 5th and 15th centuries, and spoiler alert, you're probably going to have a really bad time. Picture this, you're standing at the edge of a dense European woodland, the kind that stretched for hundreds of miles without a gas station, hiking trail, or cell tower in sight. The canopy above you is so thick that even at noon, the light filters down in strange, greenish shafts. You can hear things moving in the underbrush, probably deer, possibly boar, hopefully not the two-legged kind of threat. Your modern brain is already trying to calculate how long until rescue. But here's the thing, there is no rescue. This is just Tuesday for a medieval forester, charcoal burner, outlaw, or hermit. For you, this is about to become the hardest day of your life. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you in Melbourne where it's already tomorrow? Toronto battling another winter night? Maybe you're in Phoenix where it's still somehow 80 degrees at midnight. I love seeing where this little community stretches across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you about your medieval forest camp isn't the beauty or the adventure, it's the immediate, crushing realization that shelter here means something completely different than anything you've experienced. You're not setting up a North Face tent with color-coded poles and a rainfly that clips into place with satisfying little clicks. You're not even dealing with the relatively simple canvas tents that Civil War soldiers used. No, you're standing in the forest with whatever tools a medieval person might carry, maybe a small axe, possibly a knife, perhaps a length of rope if you're lucky and you need to create something that will keep you alive through the night. Medieval forest dwellers didn't have the luxury of designated campsites with those nice flat spots where someone already cleared the rocks. You're looking at ground that's uneven, covered in decades of leaf litter, probably damp, and hosting more insects than you've seen in your entire suburban life combined. The first task is finding a spot that won't kill you in subtle ways. You need to avoid the low areas where cold air pools at night, and yes, cold air literally pools like water, settling into valleys and depressions where it can drop the temperature by 10 or 15 degrees compared to spots just a few feet higher. Medieval campers knew this instinctively because getting it wrong meant waking up with hypothermia. If you woke up at all, you're scanning the area, trying to remember if you're supposed to camp near water or away from it. Near means easy access for drinking and cooking, but it also means moisture, insects, and in medieval times, the very real possibility of something large coming to drink at dawn or dusk while you're inconveniently in the way. The medieval solution was usually to camp within reasonable walking distance of water, but not right on top of it, maybe a 5-minute walk. Enough to discourage casual animal traffic, but not so far that hauling water becomes your entire day's workout. Now comes the shelter itself, and this is where your modern assumptions start crumbling like a stale granola bar. You might be thinking of those survival show debris huts, right? Lean a few branches against a log, pile some leaves on top, crawl inside, and boom, shelter. Except medieval forest campers rarely used that design for anything more than emergency overnight stops. And there's a good reason. Debris huts are cold, damp, and require constant maintenance. Every time the wind blows, you're losing insulation. Every time it rains, you're discovering new leaks. It's like living inside a compost pile that's slowly collapsing on you. The actual medieval forest shelter was more sophisticated. and building one is about to consume the next 4 to 6 hours of your life. If you're doing this properly the way a charcoal burner or a forester setting up a seasonal camp would, you're reconstructing what's essentially a small wattle and daub structure. You start by cutting poles, actual substantial pieces of wood maybe 3 to 4 inches in diameter at the base. Your medieval axe isn't the precision-balanced Swedish marvel you might have used at a bougie camping store. It's heavy, the handle is probably ash wood, and the head is made of iron that's softer than modern steel. You're going to be working a lot harder for every cut. You're driving these poles into the ground to create a frame, maybe a simple A-frame design. Maybe something with vertical posts and a sloped roof. Here's where it gets fun. Your modern body, used to climate-controlled offices and ergonomic desk chairs, is about to meet medieval manual labor. Driving a pole into forest soil isn't like hammering a tent stake into the ground at a campsite. You're probably hitting roots every 6 inches. The pole wants to go in crooked. Your hands are already developing blisters because medieval people had calluses in places you didn't know skin could thicken. There's a reason medieval peasants shaking hands with nobility was considered shocking. It was like grabbing a piece of weathered leather. Once you've got your frame U-panned, let's be honest, it's probably crooked enough that a medieval carpenter would laugh and then charge you extra to fix it. You need to create walls. This is where wattle comes in. And no, it's not a breakfast food. You're weaving flexible branches, usually hazel or willow, between your upright poles. It's basically basket weaving on an architectural scale. You're cutting thin, whippy branches, and then weaving them horizontally through your frame, over and under, creating a lattice. Your fingers are getting scratched by bark. Your back is screaming because you're bent over at an awkward angle. And you're only about 30% done with the wall section. Medieval craftsmen could weave wattle quickly because they'd been doing it since childhood. You're struggling to keep the branches in place. They keep popping out of the weave, and you're pretty sure this whole thing is going to collapse the moment you step back. Historians still argue whether common forest dwellers would have taken the time to properly daub their temporary shelters, or if they simply relied on the wattle itself and piled additional materials against it. Daubing fats the mixture of clay, mud, straw, and sometimes animal dung that you plaster over the wattle to create a solid, insulated wall. Turns a drafty framework into actual shelter, but it requires finding the right clay, mixing it to the right consistency, and having enough time for it to dry at least partially. Let's say you're skipping the full daub process because you don't have days to wait around. You're going with the quicker medieval forest option. Stuffing the gaps in your wattle with moss, bunching it into the spaces between branches, then packing leaves and grass against the outside. This works, sort of. It's not going to be warm, but it will cut the wind. And in medieval terms, cutting the wind is half the battle. The roof is its own special nightmare. You need something that will actually shed water, and just piling leaves on top isn't going to cut it for more than one light drizzle. Medieval forest shelters often used large strips of bark carefully removed from fallen trees. You're looking for birch if you're in Northern Europe, or oak bark if that's what's available. The trick is finding pieces large enough to be useful, which means you're searching for recently fallen trees, because bark on long dead trees is usually rotted or too brittle. You're peeling bark off a dead oak, and it's not peeling cleanly like you hoped. It's coming off in frustrating chunks. Some pieces the size of dinner plates, others barely bigger than your palm. You need dozens of these pieces, and each one has to overlap the one below it, shingle style, so water runs down and off rather than seeping through. Your modern brain is trying to calculate square footage and optimal overlap ratios, while your medieval counterpart would just eyeball it based on decades of experience you don't have. By the time you've got your roof owned, it's definitely going to leak in at least 3 places you haven't identified yet. You've burned through 6 hours. Minimum. The sun is getting lower, and you haven't even thought about fire, water, or food. Your hands look like you tried to pet a cheese grater. Your back feels like someone's been using it for hammer practice. And you're looking at this slightly crooked, definitely drafty structure that you're supposed to sleep in tonight. But here's the thing about medieval forest shelters that nobody tells you. Even this ramshackle construction you've just built is better than what outlaws and poachers often had. There's a documented account from 13th century England of forest outlaws sleeping under nothing more than their cloaks, regardless of weather, because a permanent shelter meant a permanent location, and a permanent location meant the sheriff knew where to find you. Your mediocre wattle hut is actually a luxury. Inside your new home, and let's use that term loosely, you need to think about the floor. Sleeping directly on bare earth in a medieval forest is a guaranteed way to wake up hypothermic. If you wake up at all, the ground sucks heat from your body faster than you'd believe possible. Medieval campers knew this, so they created what was essentially a mattress out of available materials. You're gathering bracken fern, which is everywhere in medieval European forests. The fronds are long, they're relatively soft, and when you pile them a foot deep, they create actual insulation between you and the frozen earth. You're making trip after trip, your arms full of bracken, piling it in your shelter until you've got a layer thick enough that when you press down on it, you don't immediately feel the ground beneath. This is going to compress during the night. Medieval people knew to gather about 3 times as much as they thought they needed, but for now, it looks almost comfortable. Almost. Here's a quirky detail that would have been common knowledge in medieval times but sounds bizarre now. The direction you orient your shelter actually matters for more than just wind protection. Medieval forest lore held that shelters should open toward the east when possible, not just for morning sunlight, but because prevailing winds in much of Europe come from the west and southwest. Your shelter opening should be facing away from those winds, which often means east or southeast. You probably built yours facing whatever direction seemed easiest when you started, which means you're about to spend tonight with wind whistling directly through your doorway. The doorway itself is just a gap in your wattle wall, maybe covered with a flap of bark or a piece of fabric if you're lucky enough to have one. Medieval forest dwellers would sometimes use a woven rush mat, but creating one of those takes skills you definitely don't have and time you've already run out of. So your door is probably just an opening you can sort of block with branches when you're inside, which is better than nothing but not by much. You step back to admire your work, and admire is definitely too strong a word. You've created something that's recognizably a structure. It has walls, most of which are staying up. It has a roof that will probably keep off some of the rain. It has a floor that might prevent you from freezing to death. In medieval terms, for someone doing this for the first time, you've actually done okay. In modern terms, this thing wouldn't pass inspection as a storage shed for garden tools. But the real test isn't whether it looks good, it's whether it will keep you alive through the night. And that depends on factors you haven't even begun to address yet. The temperature is dropping as the sun gets lower. You can feel the dampness in the air, that particular humidity of a forest in evening. Your medieval counterpart would already have a fire going, water heating, maybe something cooking. You're standing outside your crooked little shelter, exhausted from construction, and you haven't even started on the basics of survival. There's something psychologically crushing about this moment that medieval people would have just accepted as normal. You've worked for hours, you're physically depleted, and you're nowhere near done with the day's tasks. There's no quitting time, no clocking out, no delivery pizza to reward yourself with. The forest doesn't care about your effort. It only cares whether you've done enough to survive. And right now, the honest answer is probably not. Your shelter is going to be cold tonight. It's going to be drafty. Things are definitely going to crawl on you from that bracken bedding, probably spiders, possibly beetles, maybe something you don't even want to identify. The roof is going to leak in those spots you haven't found yet, and you're going to discover them the wet way. And all of this assumes you make it through the night, which depends entirely on whether you can manage the next crucial task: fire. But before we get to fire, take a moment to appreciate what you've just learned. Shelter in a medieval forest wasn't about comfort. It was about not dying. That's it. That's the bar. And you've spent half a day just barely clearing it, with a structure that a medieval charcoal burner would consider a decent first attempt. Now let's fix everything you did wrong. Welcome to medieval forest camping, where your best effort gets you a C- and hypothermia is still on the table. The shelter is done well. Done in the sense that it exists and probably won't collapse immediately. Now you're facing the task that separates the living from the frozen: making fire. And here's the part where your modern brain, trained by a lifetime of lighters, matches, and gas stoves, is about to betray you completely. You've maybe seen fire starting on survival shows, watched someone spin a stick really fast and get flames, thought that looks doable. Spoiler: it's not doable, not the way you think, and definitely not on your first try in a medieval forest while the sun is setting and the temperature is dropping. Medieval fire starting was a skill set, a whole profession in some cases. There were people whose entire job was keeping fire alive because starting it from scratch was such a monumental pain that avoiding it was worth actual money. You're about to understand why. Your medieval toolkit for fire starting probably includes a few options. None of them good for a beginner. The most common method, the one that medieval peasants, foresters, and travelers relied on, was the strike-a-light method using flint and steel. Except you probably don't have proper flint, and your steel is actually iron, which is similar but not quite as effective. You're kneeling on the damp ground, because of course it's damp. Everything in a medieval forest is damp, and you're trying to remember how this is supposed to work. You've got your piece of flint in one hand, maybe it's actual flint. Maybe it's just a very hard rock you're hoping will work, and your steel striker in the other. The steel is basically a C-shaped piece of metal, and the technique is to strike the flint sharply downward against the steel, creating sparks that fall onto your tinder. Simple, right? Except your first 10 strikes produce exactly 0 sparks. Your next 10 produce sparks that go everywhere except where you want them. Strike 23 finally sends a spark onto your tinder bundle, and it does absolutely nothing. Here's what medieval people knew that you don't. The tinder matters more than almost anything else. You can't just grab some dry leaves and expect them to catch from a spark. You need something that will take a spark and nurture it into an ember, something with the right texture, the right dryness, the right combustibility. The medieval gold standard was char cloth, which is fabric that's been charred in a low-oxygen environment until it's black and catches sparks like magic. Making char cloth requires having a fire already, which creates a fun circular problem you don't have time for. So you're going with natural tinder, and your choices are actually pretty limited in a medieval forest. You're looking for thistledown if it's the right season, or cramp ball fungus, which grows on dead ash trees and turns into the perfect char when it's been burned partially. But you probably don't know what cramp ball fungus looks like, and thistledown season might be months away, so you're stuck with the fallback option, making tinder from scratch using whatever you can find. The best natural option you can realistically obtain is inner bark from certain trees, specifically the fuzzy, fibrous stuff between the outer bark and the wood. You're looking for a dead, standing tree, not a fallen log, because those are too wet and you're using your knife to peel back the outer bark and expose the inner layer. With a birch tree, you get lucky because birch bark has oils that make it burn even when damp. With other trees, you're getting stringy fibers that you need to process. Processing means scraping the inner bark fibers with the back of your knife blade, teasing them apart, creating what's essentially a fibrous nest. Your medieval counterpart could do this in about 2 minutes. You're taking 15 minutes and creating something that looks more like a failed craft project than functional tinder. Your fingers are getting raw from the scraping motion, and you're producing a pile of fibers that's maybe, possibly, hopefully dry enough to catch a spark. Now you're back to the flint and steel, and your hands are already tired from shelter building. Strike, strike, strike. A spark lands in your tinder bundle, and you see a tiny red glow, so small you're not sure it's real. This is the critical moment, and here's where medieval fire making becomes almost meditative, except you're too panicked to meditate. You need to gently blow on that ember, feeding it oxygen without blowing it out, nurturing it without smothering it. You're bringing the tinder bundle up to your face, cupping it gently, not too tight or you'll crush the ember, not too loose or the fibers will fall apart. You blow softly, and the ember glows brighter. You blow again, and you can see a tiny wisp of smoke. Your modern brain is screaming, it's working. But your medieval training, which you don't have, would be whispering, steady, not yet, patience. You blow too hard. The ember goes out. You've just wasted 20 minutes and you're back to square one. Historians still argue whether common medieval people were actually proficient at fire starting or if they simply avoided letting fires go out whenever possible. There's evidence that many households and camps maintained fires continuously, sometimes for months, because restarting was such a hassle. Village bakers would keep their ovens at low burns overnight. Shepherds in the field would carefully bank fires before sleeping, burying coals in ash to keep them alive until morning. The idea of casually starting a fire whenever you wanted one was almost a luxury. But you don't have a fire to keep alive, so you're starting from scratch. Again, this time you're more careful with your tinder preparation, really working those bark fibers until they're almost fluffy. You're building a better nest, creating a little depression in the middle where the spark can land and be protected from wind. Your second attempt with the flint and steel goes a bit better, getting more consistent sparks, and you're aiming them more accurately into the tinder bundle. A spark lands. It glows. You resist the urge to immediately start blowing on it, giving it a few seconds to establish itself in the fibers. Then you bring the bundle up, cup it loosely, and blow with the gentleness of someone defusing a bomb. The ember grows. Smoke wisps up. You blow again. A little more air this time, and suddenly there's actual smoke. Real smoke. Enough that you're coughing because it's going right in your face. The fibers begin to glow, spreading from the initial ember. You keep blowing, steady, consistent, and then flames. Actual tiny flames are licking up through your tinder bundle, and you've got maybe 10 seconds to get this into your prepared fire lay before the whole thing burns up in your hands. Except you didn't prepare a fire lay, because you're new at this and didn't think that far ahead. You're frantically looking around for something to put this flaming bundle into, and you're basically just dumping it on the ground and throwing small sticks at it, hoping something catches. Half the flames go out from your panicked stick throwing. The other half catch onto a few small twigs, and you've got the beginnings of actual fire. Building up a fire from those first fragile flames is its own skill. You can't jump straight from tinder to logs. The fire needs to grow through stages, each one slightly larger than the last. You start with twigs no thicker than a matchstick, adding them carefully so they catch but don't smother the flames. Then pencil-thick sticks. Then thumb-thick branches. Each stage needs to burn hot enough to ignite the next size up. Your medieval fire-building technique should follow the principle that was common knowledge back then. Feed the fire, don't smother it. But you're probably doing what every beginner does, adding too much fuel too fast. Excited that you've got flames and wanting to make them bigger immediately. The fire sputters, struggles, and you're backing off, trying to salvage it. Here's a quirky medieval detail. Professional firemakers, the people hired to maintain fires in castles and manor houses, would sometimes carry fire horns, hollowed cow horns sealed with a wooden plug, filled with smoldering tinder or charred cloth. They could keep an ember alive in there for hours, protected from wind and moisture, ready to be blown into flame when needed. It was basically a pocket fire, and it meant the difference between starting from scratch and having flames in 30 seconds. You don't have a fire horn, obviously, so you're doing this the hard way. Your fire is finally growing, and you're feeding it larger sticks, graduating to branches as thick as your wrist. This is where wood selection starts to matter in ways you never thought about. Different woods burn differently. Some create lots of smoke. Some produce great coals. Some pop and spit sparks everywhere. Medieval forest dwellers knew their woods intimately. Oak for long-burning coals. Birch for quick heat. Pine for kindling but not for cooking because it makes everything taste like resin, which supposedly burns even when green, though that's a bit of an exaggeration. You're probably just burning whatever you found nearby, which means you're getting unpredictable results. Maybe you grabbed some pine by mistake, and now your fire is smoking like a signal beacon and spitting resin at you. Maybe you found some old oak, and it's burning perfectly but taking forever to establish good coals. The ideal medieval fire for camp use is burning hardwood that's been dead for a year or two, dry enough to burn clean, aged enough to have lost the moisture, not so old that it's rotted and crumbly. Your fire is going now, actually going, and the relief is almost overwhelming. But here's the reality check. You've just spent somewhere between 40 minutes and 2 hours getting to this point. A medieval person with proper materials and experience could have a fire going in 5 to 10 minutes. You've burned through a huge chunk of your remaining daylight. Your hands are blistered from the flint and steel, and you've learned a humbling lesson about skills that medieval people mastered as children. Now comes fire maintenance, which is going to be your life for the rest of the night. Medieval fires required constant attention because fuel efficiency mattered when every piece of wood had to be gathered by hand. You're not building a bonfire that's a waste of wood and produces more light than heat. You're building a working fire, something that produces steady heat with manageable fuel consumption. The trick is to create a coal bed. You're burning wood down until you have a layer of glowing coals at the base of your fire. Coals produce steady, even heat without flames, which is perfect for cooking and for sleeping next to without burning through your entire wood supply in 3 hours. Building up that coal bed takes time. You need to burn enough wood to create a substantial layer of coals. but not so much that you're wasting fuel on unnecessary flames. You're sitting by your fire as the sun fully sets, and you're starting to understand the medieval relationship with firelight. This isn't the cheerful camping experience you imagined. The fire creates a sphere of light and heat maybe 8 feet in diameter, and beyond that is absolute darkness. Your eyes keep trying to adjust to see into the forest, but the fire ruins your night vision. Everything outside the firelight is just shapes and shadows and the occasional sound of something moving. Medieval people lived with this kind of darkness every day, and it shaped their entire psychology. Fire wasn't just about warmth or cooking, it was about creating a bubble of civilization in the wilderness. The fire was the boundary between the human world and everything else. Letting it go out wasn't just inconvenient, it was psychologically devastating. You're also discovering that campfire smoke has a personal vendetta against you. No matter where you sit, the smoke seems to follow, getting in your eyes, making you cough. There's even a medieval saying about it: smoke follows beauty, which was apparently their way of making people feel better about constantly getting smoked out. The real reason is air currents and pressure differentials, but medieval people didn't know that, so they blamed it on attractiveness or various superstitions. Your fire needs feeding every 20 to 30 minutes, which means your wood gathering isn't done. You're making trips into the darkness just beyond your fire, gathering dead branches, dragging them back, breaking them to size. Each trip into the dark is slightly terrifying because your eyes can't adjust. You're blind outside the firelight, stumbling over roots, walking into branches, hoping you don't step on something that bites. Medieval forest campers would gather wood during daylight, stockpiling enough for the entire night so they wouldn't have to venture out after dark. You didn't think that far ahead, so you're living with the consequences. Each wood-gathering trip is an adventure in stubbed toes and mild panic. Here's something that would be second nature to a medieval camper but is completely foreign to you: fire placement relative to your shelter. You can't put the fire too close to your wattle shelter or you'll burn the whole thing down. But you can't put it too far away or you won't get any heat benefit during the night. The sweet spot is about 6 to 8 feet from your shelter opening, close enough that radiant heat reaches inside, far enough that sparks won't ignite your roof. You probably didn't think about this when you started your fire, so it's either too close, in which case you'll be paranoid about burning down your shelter all night, or too far away, meaning you're going to freeze despite having a fire. Medieval campers would sometimes build a reflector wall opposite their shelter, stacking green logs or building a stone barrier that would bounce heat back toward their sleeping area. You don't have time for that level of sophistication. The temperature is really dropping now, and you're discovering another medieval fire truth. Fire heats one side of you at a time. Your front is toasty, almost uncomfortably hot. Your back is cold, getting colder, and you're doing this constant rotation like a rotisserie chicken, trying to stay warm on all sides. Medieval people would sleep in their clothes. All of the men positioned themselves so the fire heated their front while their shelter blocked wind from their back. It was a calculated geometry of survival. You're also learning about sparks the hard way. Medieval clothing was wool, which resists burning and just develops little charred spots when sparks land on it. Your modern synthetic outdoor gear? It's melting. That expensive fleece you're wearing now has 3 small holes where sparks landed and melted straight through. Your polyester shirt is puckered with tiny burn marks. Everything you're wearing is slowly being destroyed by the fire you need to survive. Let's talk about the actual heat output for a moment, because medieval fires were nothing like the roaring blazes you see in movies. Fuel efficiency meant keeping fires small and controlled. Your fire is probably producing somewhere in the range of 1,000 to 3,000 BTUs, which sounds like a lot until you realize that a modern space heater produces 5,000 BTUs and heats one room. You're trying to stay warm in an entire forest with less heat than a space heater produces, and most of that heat is escaping straight up into the night sky. Medieval people compensated with layers, with shelter design, with sleeping close to fires and accepting the constant risk of sparks. They'd wake up multiple times a night to feed the fire, which wasn't insomniate, was survival. You're about to experience that same pattern, except you don't have the ingrained habits that make it almost automatic. Your fire is stable now, finally, and you're sitting next to it feeling a complicated mixture of achievement and exhaustion. You've created fire using medieval methods, and you didn't die in the process. That's genuinely impressive for a first-timer. But you've also spent hours on a task that medieval people could do in minutes, and the night is just beginning. The flames are dancing in ways that medieval people would have read like a book. High flames mean good draw and dry wood. Low flames mean dampness or poor airflow. Sparking means resin or moisture pockets. You're just watching fire be fire, mesmerized and exhausted, with no idea what it's telling you. And here's the final humbling reality. This fire, this precious fire you struggled so hard to create, is gonna go out eventually. Maybe you'll fall asleep and it will die from neglect. Maybe the wind will pick up and blow it out. Maybe morning will come and you'll let it fade because you're too tired to care. And when it goes out, if you need fire again, you're back to square one with the flint and steel, back to those desperate sparks and fragile embers. Medieval people respected fire in ways we can't fully understand anymore. It was life, warmth, light, protection, and cooked food all in one package. Losing it was a minor tragedy. Creating it was a skill worth teaching to children as young as 5 or 6. You've just gotten a tiny taste of why. The fire crackles, sending a shower of sparks up into the darkness, and you're rotating again, trying to get warmth on your cold side. Welcome to the next 12 hours of your life. You've got shelter, you've got fire barely, and now your body is sending you urgent signals that can't be ignored anymore. You're thirsty. Not could go for a drink thirsty, but genuinely, physically depleted from hours of manual labor without hydration. That stream you passed earlier, the one that looked so crystal clear and inviting, is calling to you. And this is where medieval forest survival gets genuinely dangerous in ways that won't kill you immediately but will absolutely ruin you over the next few days. Here's the thing about medieval water knowledge. They knew water could kill you, they just didn't know why. The germ theory of disease wouldn't arrive until the 19th century. So medieval people developed rules about water through centuries of trial, error, and a lot of people dying in really unpleasant ways. Some of their rules were surprisingly accurate. Others were complete superstition. And you, standing in this medieval forest, don't know which is which. That beautiful clear stream looks safe because your modern brain equates clarity with cleanliness. Crystal clear water, bubbling over rocks, probably coming from a spring somewhere upstream. That's got to be good, right? Except medieval people knew better, even if they didn't know the science. They had sayings about water, warnings passed down through generations. Water that runs quick over stone is friend to none, or still waters may sleep, but running waters remember the dead. The second saying is actually eerily accurate. Running water in a medieval forest has passed through miles of wilderness, possibly through areas where animals died and decomposed, definitely through areas where animals defecate, certainly through soil that contains all manner of bacteria and parasites that would love to set up shop in your intestines. That clarity you're seeing? It just means there's no visible sediment. It tells you absolutely nothing about the invisible threats swimming in every sip. You're kneeling by the stream, cupping water in your hands, and you're facing a choice that medieval people faced constantly. Drink now and risk sickness later, or find some way to make this water safe. The problem is that making water safe in medieval times was based partly on solid observation and partly on complete guesswork, and separating the two requires knowledge you don't have. The most reliable medieval water treatment was boiling, and they knew it worked even if they didn't know why. The wealthy would drink wine or ale not just for pleasure, but because the fermentation process made questionable water safer. The poor would boil water for soups, stews, and porridges, which conveniently sterilized it. But you're not making stew right, no, you're desperately thirsty, and boiling water means finding a container, waiting for the fire to heat it, waiting for the water to cool enough to drink. That's an hour minimum, and your body is demanding hydration now. So you're probably going to do what desperate medieval travelers did. You're going to drink straight from the source and hope for the best. You cup your hands, bring the water to your lips, and it's cold, shockingly cold, and it tastes like water. Maybe a slight mineral tang, maybe a hint of earth, but basically water. It's satisfying in a way that makes you want to drink more. And you do, gulping down several handfuls, feeling it hit your empty stomach. Congratulations, you just rolled the dice on dysentery, giardia, cryptosporidium, and a whole alphabet of microscopic organisms that medieval people called bad humors or corrupt airs, because they couldn't see the real culprits. Some of these will make themselves known in 6 to 12 hours. Others will wait days, building up their populations in your gut before launching a full assault. Here's a quirky medieval belief that was actually sort of onto something. Water was considered safer if it flowed over certain types of stone. Limestone filtered water was prized, and they were right about that. Limestone does naturally filter some contaminants. But they also thought water was purified by flowing past churches or holy sites, which is less scientifically supportable. You're drinking from whatever stream you found, with no idea what kind of stone it's flowing over or what's upstream. Medieval people also believed you could test water quality by its taste, temperature, and how it made you feel immediately after drinking. Cold, tasteless water was generally considered good. Warm, flat-tasting water was suspicious. Water that left a coating in your mouth or made your stomach feel odd right away was definitely bad. These aren't terrible guidelines. Actual theory, observational wisdom developed over centuries, but they're not going to protect you from parasites that have no taste and produce no immediate symptoms. Let's talk about what's probably in that water you just drank. Because medieval forests were basically parasite breeding grounds. Giardia loves cold mountain streamsit, can survive in near-freezing water, and it's spread by animal feces, which are everywhere in a forest. One microscopic cyst, too small to see, too small to taste, and in a week you're experiencing what medieval people called the flux, explosive diarrhea that can dehydrate you to death if it's severe enough. Cryptosporidium is even worse because it's resistant to chlorine. Not that medieval people had chlorine, but it means this parasite is particularly hardy. It causes similar symptoms to giardia but can last longer and hit harder. Medieval physicians would diagnose it as an imbalance of humors and prescribe treatments that ranged from useless to actively harmful: bleeding, purging, special diets that made dehydration worse. Then there are the bacteria E. coli from animal waste, Campylobacter from birds, leptospirosis from rodent urine that got into the water. Each one comes with its own special flavor of misery. Medieval people called the resulting sicknesses by different names: the bloody flux, camp fever, the griping in the guts, but they all boiled down to the same reality. Contaminated water could kill you, just slowly enough that you might not connect your death to that drink you took 3 days ago. Historians still argue whether medieval people's widespread consumption of ale and wine was primarily about calories and alcohol content, or if there was genuine understanding that these beverages were safer than water. The alcohol content in medieval ale was low, maybe 2–3%, but fermentation does kill many pathogens. Beer was called liquid bread and consumed at nearly every meal. Even children drank it. The alternative was often water that could make you seriously ill. You're still thirsty, despite the water you drank, because you're actually dehydrated from hours of work and your body needs more. You're heading back to the stream, and this time you're thinking maybe you should boil some water. Do this properly. But boiling water in a medieval forest context is harder than you think, because you probably don't have a metal pot. Medieval travelers might carry a small bronze or copper pot, but that's extra weight and expense. Common people may do with other methods. One option is stone boiling. You heat rocks in your fire until they're scorching hot, then drop them into a container of water, maybe a leather bag, maybe a carved wooden bowl, maybe even a depression in a large piece of bark. The hot stones bring the water to a boil. Eventually, you're attempting this because it seems doable. You've found some stones from the stream bed, and here's your first mistake. Because river stones often have moisture trapped inside them, and when you heat them in a fire, that moisture expands and the stone explodes. You're lucky the first one only cracks loudly and doesn't send shrapnel into your face. Medieval people knew to look for specific types of stone dents. Dry rocks from away from water sources, but you're learning this through trial and error. Emphasis on error. You find some better stones, heat them until they're glowing, and you've fashioned a bark container, folding it carefully so it holds water without immediately leaking. You drop the first hot stone in, and it hisses dramatically, steam erupting, and the water gets warm. Not boiling, just warm. You need more stones, hotter stones, and this is going to take a while. Medieval people with access to clay pottery had it easier. They could put a pot directly on the fire or near enough to heat water efficiently. You're working with bark and hot rocks, which is technically functional but incredibly inefficient. You're dropping in stone after stone, and the water is finally starting to bubble, actual rolling boil, and you're feeling accomplished until you realize the bark container is starting to char at the edges where it's thinnest. You manage to boil maybe a pint of water before your bark container fails completely, the bottom giving out and dumping hot water and stones onto the ground. You've just spent 45 minutes producing 1 pint of safe water, which you can't even drink yet because it's still hot enough to burn your mouth. This is the medieval water reality. Safe water required time, effort, fuel, and equipment. It was easier to risk drinking questionable water than to go through this process for every drink. So people did. They drank from streams, wells, springs, and puddles, and they got sick a lot. Chronic low-level intestinal distress was just normal life for many people. Here's another medieval water source you might try: dew collection. In the early morning, when everything in the forest is covered in condensation, you can wipe it up with cloth and wring it into a container. Dew is essentially distilled water. It's evaporated and recondensed, which leaves behind most contaminants. Medieval people understood that dew was generally safe, though they attributed it to the purity of night air or the blessing of dawn rather than understanding the actual evaporation process. But it's not morning, so dew collection isn't an option yet. You're stuck with stream water, and you're playing the odds every time you drink. Maybe you'll be fine. Plenty of medieval people drank untreated water and survived. Maybe you'll get mildly sick, some stomach cramps, a day of feeling off, or maybe you'll get properly ill, and then you're trying to survive in a medieval forest while your body is violently rejecting everything you put in it. There's also the water storage problem. You need something to carry water in, to keep some near your shelter so you're not making trips to the stream all night. Medieval travelers used leather bottles, wineskins treated to hold water without rotting. You don't have that. You might try to fashion something from birch bark, rolling it into a cylinder and sealing the seams with pine resin. This works, sort of, for short-term storage, but the seams leak and the bark eventually fails. Some medieval forest dwellers would hollow out a piece of wood, creating a wooden bottle or cup. This requires finding the right wood, something that won't crack or split, usually a branch with a natural hollow or a piece of green wood that can be carved. You're trying this, using your knife to hollow out a section of a branch, and you're producing something that technically holds water but looks like it was made by someone who's never seen a cup before. The water in your makeshift wooden cup tastes woody, with hints of whatever sap was in the branch. It's not great, but it's wet, and that's what matters. You're drinking it, feeling it help with the dehydration, and trying not to think about what else might be in it. Medieval water wisdom included knowing which plants indicated good water sources. Watercress growing in a stream was a good signet, meant the water was relatively clean and flowing. Willows and alders meant water close to the surface. But scummy, green water with algae blooms? Stay away. Water where nothing grew? Also suspicious. You're trying to remember if you saw any plants in or near your stream, and you honestly can't recall because you were too focused on being thirsty. Here's a genuinely useful medieval trick you probably don't know. If you dig a hole about 3 feet from a stream and let it fill with seepage water, that water has been naturally filtered through soil and is generally safer than the stream itself. This is basically creating a natural filter well, and it works because soil traps many parasites and bacteria. But you'd need to know to do this, and you'd need to wait for the hole to fill, and you'd need to dig in the right spot at the right distance from the stream. You're not doing any of that because you don't know about it, so you're drinking straight from the stream or drinking your poorly boiled water, and you're hoping that medieval luck is on your side. The odds aren't terrible. Plenty of people survived on questionable water, but they're not great either. As night fully sets in, you're making another water run, stumbling down to the stream with your sad wooden cup, and you're starting to understand why medieval people were so concerned about water sources when choosing camp locations. Access to water is non-negotiable for survival, but bad water can kill you just as surely as no water. It's a balancing act, and every drink is a small gamble. You fill your cup again, and in the moonlight, assuming there is moonlight filtering through the trees, the water looks different. Less clear, more mysterious. Medieval people believed that water had different qualities at different times of day, that dawn water was purest, that midnight water held darkness within it. Superstition, mostly, but rooted in the observable fact that water conditions do change. Stirred up sediment at certain times, different animal activity, varying temperatures. You drink anyway because you need to, and you head back to your fire, carrying your sloshing wooden cup, wondering if you've just poisoned yourself in slow motion. The medieval answer would be, possibly, but what choice did you have? Water is life, even when that water might also be death. It's just a question of timing. Your thirst is managed, at least temporarily, and now your stomach is making demands that can't be ignored. You haven't eaten since. Actually, you can't remember when you last ate, and your body is running on empty after hours of shelter building and fire starting. You're in a medieval forest, surrounded by what should be abundant food trees, plants, mushrooms, maybe animals if you're lucky. Except here's the terrifying reality. This forest is simultaneously full of food and full of things that will kill you if you eat them, and telling the difference requires knowledge you absolutely don't have. Medieval foragers knew their environment intimately because mistakes were fatal. They learned from childhood which berries were safe, which mushrooms could be eaten, which plants were medicine and which were poison. You're standing in a forest at dusk with none of that knowledge, your stomach growling, looking at plants and fungi that might be dinner or might be your last meal. Let's start with the berries, because your modern brain probably thinks berries equals food. You're seeing some dark berries on a bush near your shelter, clustered nicely, looking plump and juicy. They might be elderberries, which are edible when cooked but can cause serious digestive upset when raw. They might be nightshade berries, which will kill you. They might be something completely different. You have no idea, and that's the problem. Medieval people had rhymes and rules for berry identification. Berries white, poisonous sight. Berries red, have no dread unless in clusters overhead. Berries black, make a tasty snack. Except this rhyme is overly simplistic and has exceptions that could kill you. White baneberries, deadly. Red baneberries, also deadly. Black nightshade, toxic despite being black. The rhyme is a starting point, not a guarantee, and medieval children learned the specific plants in their region through direct teaching, not through catchy but unreliable poems. You're probably going to skip the berries you can see because uncertainty about poison is a pretty good appetite suppressant. So you're thinking about other options. Mushrooms are everywhere in a medieval forest, especially in damp conditions, pushing up through the leaf litter in fascinating shapes and colors. And this is where the medieval forest becomes genuinely terrifying, because mushroom foraging is expert-level survival that requires knowledge you definitely don't have. Here's what medieval people knew. Some mushrooms are delicious, some are medicinal, and some will destroy your liver while you're still congratulating yourself on a good meal. The symptoms of the worst mushroom poisoning, from death caps or destroying angels, didn't even start until 6 to 12 hours after eating, by which point the toxins have already done irreversible damage. You feel fine, then suddenly you don't, and then you die over the course of several agonizing days. Medieval foragers had tested knowledge passed down through generations. They knew that the mushrooms growing on specific trees at specific times were safe. They knew what the deadly ones looked like, where they grew, how to spot the subtle differences between an edible mushroom and its toxic look-alike. You're staring at a cluster of brown mushrooms and thinking, those look normal, which is exactly the kind of thinking that gets you killed. There's no universal rule for mushroom safety. If animals eat it, the safe is false. Animals can process toxins we can't. Mushrooms that peel are safe is false. Cooking destroys the poison is false for many species. Every folk rule has exceptions, and those exceptions are fatal. Medieval people knew this, which is why mushroom foraging was a respected skill, not something you attempted casually. So you're skipping the mushrooms too, because you're not quite desperate enough to play Russian roulette with fungi. That leaves plants, and here the odds are slightly better but still not great. Some plants are obviously edible if you can find them and identify them correctly. Dandelions, for instance, which medieval people ate regularly. The leaves are bitter but safe. The roots can be roasted. The flowers can be eaten. But you need to know what a dandelion looks like in all its growth stages. And you need to not confuse it with similar-looking plants that aren't safe. You're searching the forest floor, looking for something, anything you recognize. There's a plant with broad leaves that might be wild garlic if you crush a leaf and it smells like garlic. It's probably safe. Except you're not sure if this is wild garlic or one of several lookalikes. And some of those lookalikes are toxic. Medieval foragers would know immediately from the smell, the leaf shape, the growth pattern. You're guessing, and guessing with wild food is how people die. Here's a genuinely useful medieval foraging principle you might stumble upon. Stinging nettles. If you can find nettles, and you'll know them by the painful stinging sensation when you accidentally grab one, they're actually nutritious and safe once cooked. The stinging hairs are destroyed by heat, leaving you with something like spinach. Medieval people ate nettles regularly, especially in spring when other greens were scarce. They made nettle soup, nettle stew, nettle anything. But harvesting nettles without gloves is its own special misery, and cooking them requires time and water and a container that can handle heat. You're starting to see the pattern. Every potential food source requires either knowledge you don't have or effort you're too exhausted to make. Medieval survival wasn't about finding food, it was about having the skills to process what you found into something edible. Let's talk about nuts, because if this is autumn, the forest floor might be covered with them. Acorns are everywhere under oak trees, and medieval people ate them regularly but only after processing. Raw acorns contain tannins that will make you sick, cause severe stomach cramps, and provide basically no nutrition because your body can't process them properly. Medieval foragers would leach acorns, crushing them and soaking them in multiple changes of water until the tannins were removed. This could take days. You're picking up acorns, cracking one open with a rock, tasting the kernel inside. It's bitter, astringent, and your mouth feels weird immediately. That's the tannins, and eating more would make you genuinely ill. You spit it out, and there goes that food source, without knowing the leaching process. Acorns are useless to you, even though medieval peasants relied on them during hard times. Beechnuts are better, they can be eaten raw in small quantities, and they're actually pretty good. Hazelnuts are safe and delicious. Chestnuts are filling and nutritious. But you need to know what these trees look like, and you need to find them at the right time of year when nuts are available. You're wandering the forest in the growing darkness, looking at tree shapes and trying to remember your basic botany from school, which is absolutely not enough to keep you alive. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants experienced regular hunger or if forest foraging provided adequate supplementary nutrition during lean times. Some evidence suggests that forest access was crucial for survival. Gathered foods, hunted game, collected nuts all added up to meaningful calories. Other evidence suggests that foraging was unreliable and people regularly went hungry. The truth probably varied by region, season, and individual knowledge, but the common thread is that successful foraging required expertise. Here's a quirky medieval food source that would be everywhere but that you probably wouldn't recognize: wild roots. Medieval people dug up all sorts of roots: wild parsnip, wild carrot, burdock root, cattail rhizomes. Some of these are legitimately nutritious. Others look similar but are toxic. Wild carrot, Queen Anne's lace, has an edible root but looks a lot like poison hemlock, which famously killed Socrates. The difference is in subtle detail: stem markings, root smell, leaf patterns that medieval foragers knew intimately. You're not digging for roots because you don't have proper digging tools and you wouldn't know what you were looking at anyway. The irony is that you're literally surrounded by calories. The forest is full of edible materials, but they're locked behind knowledge barriers you can't cross. It's like being in a grocery store where all the labels are in a language you don't read. The food is right there, you just can't safely access it. So what are you actually eating tonight? Probably nothing, or close to nothing. Maybe you found some rose hips, the fruit of wild roses, which are safe and vitamin C rich but not very filling. Maybe you found some wood sorrel, which has a pleasant lemony taste and won't kill you but provides minimal calories. You're having what medieval people would call a spare meal, enough to quiet the stomach temporarily, but nowhere near enough for someone who's been doing hard labor all day. Your body is running on fumes, and you're feeling it. Lightheaded, shaky. Your thoughts are starting to get fuzzy at the edges. Medieval peasants were often partially malnourished, existing on just enough calories to function but not enough to thrive. You're getting a compressed version of that experience. And it's only been one day. Let's talk about meat, because surely there are animals you could hunt, right? The medieval forest was full of game deer, or rabbits, birds. Except hunting requires tools you don't have and skills you definitely don't possess. Medieval hunters used bows, spears, traps, and snares, and they trained for years to be effective. You have a knife and some desperate hunger, which isn't a hunting strategy. You could theoretically set a snare, a simple loop of cord positioned on an animal trail, designed to tighten around a rabbit's neck when it runs through. Medieval poachers were experts at this, placing snares where they'd be effective but hidden from gamekeepers. The problem is knowing where to set them, how to tie the loop correctly, what kind of trigger mechanism to use. You're attempting this, using some cord to create a loop, placing it on what you hope is an animal trail but is probably just a spot where leaves are flattened randomly. Your snare is poorly made, poorly positioned, and almost certainly not going to catch anything. Medieval poachers would check dozens of snares daily, and they'd be lucky to get 1 or 2 catches. You've got one sad snare that wouldn't fool a blind rabbit, but you're leaving it overnight anyway, because hope is free and you're starving. Birds are another option. Theoretically, medieval people trapped birds using nets, lime sticks, branches covered with sticky substance, and various clever tricks. You have none of these things. You could try to knock a bird out of a tree with a thrown rock, which is basically impossible even for someone with good aim and arm strength. You're throwing rocks at birds that fly away long before the rock gets close, and you're just wasting energy you can't afford to lose. There's also fishing, if you're near water with fish in it. Medieval fishing used hooks made from bone or metal, or weirs and traps built across streams. You don't have hooks, and building a fish weir requires time and knowledge of fish behavior. You could try to grab fish with your hands. Medieval people did this, waiting patiently for fish to swim between their fingers and then snatching them. It requires incredible patience, still water, and fish that are cooperating. You're attempting this, standing in the cold stream, hands underwater, waiting for fish that probably aren't even there. Your hands are going numb from the cold water. You haven't seen a single fish, and you're giving up on this method after 15 minutes of accomplishing nothing. Medieval people who fished by hand would spend hours at it, often catching enough fish to make it worthwhile. You don't have hours, and you don't have the skill. So here's your actual medieval forest meal. You're chewing on some pine needles, which are technically edible and provide some vitamin C but taste like turpentine. You've found a few rose hips and eaten those, getting maybe 20 calories total. You located some with sorrel and chewed that, which was pleasantly sour but not filling. Your total caloric intake for the day is probably under 200 calories, while you've burned several thousand through all that labor. Medieval people in survival situations would sometimes go days without proper food, operating on starvation rations, their bodies consuming their own fat and then muscle for fuel. You're getting your first real taste of hunger, not the "I skipped lunch" kind, but the deep, gnawing emptiness that makes you think about food constantly. You're sitting by your fire, roasting some pine bark because you heard somewhere that the inner bark of certain trees is edible. It is technically the cambium layer between bark and would contain some nutrition, but it's fibrous, difficult to chew, and not particularly digestible. You're gnawing on roasted pine bark like it's a gourmet meal, trying to extract any possible calorie, and mostly just creating jaw fatigue. Here's what medieval people in your situation might do. They'd fast, conserve energy, and wait for better opportunities. Experienced forest dwellers knew that wasting energy searching for food you might not find was worse than just resting and surviving on body reserves. But your modern metabolism isn't adapted to theory used to 3 meals a day plus snacks, and your body is in mild panic mode over the sudden calorie deficit. The psychological impact of hunger is hitting you hard. You're thinking about food, constantly imagining pizza, burgers, that leftover Chinese food in your fridge back home. Medieval people experienced this too, and it shows up in their literature. Fantasies about feasts, dreams about tables loaded with food, obsessive descriptions of meals. Hunger does this to human brains. It makes food the center of your mental universe. You're going to bed hungry tonight, and that's just the reality of medieval forest survival without expert knowledge. The forest has food, but it's not giving it up to you. You've survived the day without poisoning yourself, which is actually an achievement. But you haven't thrived, not even close. You're weaker, hungrier, and facing another day tomorrow where finding food will be just as difficult. Remember that poorly set snare? It's not going to have anything in it tomorrow morning. Medieval hunting was a skill that took years to develop, and one desperate amateur snare represents nothing but wasted hope. But you'll check it anyway, because when you're starving, even a 1% chance is worth the effort. Welcome to medieval forest dining, where the menu is mystery, the portions are microscopic, and every meal might be your last either because you're starving or because you ate the wrong mushroom. The sun has fully set now, and you're discovering what darkness really means in a medieval forest. This isn't the darkness of your bedroom with a little streetlight leaking through the curtains. This isn't even the darkness of a modern camping trip where you've got a headlamp in your pocket and the distant glow of civilization somewhere on the horizon. This is absolute, total, prehistoric darkness, the kind that presses against your eyes like a physical weight. Your fire creates a bubble of flickering light maybe 10 feet across, and beyond that is a void so complete it feels malevolent. Medieval people lived with this darkness every single night, and it fundamentally shaped how they thought about the world. Night wasn't just the absence of day, it was its own realm, governed by different rules, inhabited by different things. Your rational modern brain knows that darkness is just the absence of light, that nothing actually changes when the sun goes down. But your primitive brain, the deep ancient part that kept your ancestors alive, is screaming that night is dangerous and you should be terrified. You're feeding your fire, trying to keep it bright, and you're realizing that firelight is almost worse than total darkness in some ways. The flames cast dancing shadows that look like movement. Every flicker makes shapes in your peripheral vision that your brain interprets as threats. Medieval people believed that demons and evil spirits were more active at night, and while that's superstition, the psychological experience of watching shadows twist and jump in firelight makes those beliefs feel uncomfortably plausible. Here's what's actually happening in the forest around you. Nocturnal animals are waking up and starting their nightly routines. Owls are hunting. Foxes are moving through the underbrush. Badgers are foraging. Deer are grazing, though more cautiously than during the day. Mice, voles, and shrews are everywhere, scurrying through the leaf litter. Bats are swooping overhead, though you can't see them. The forest is actually more alive at night in many ways, but all of that activity is invisible to you, reduced to mysterious sounds in the darkness. And those sounds are driving you slowly insane. Every snap of a twig sounds like something large approaching. Every rustle in the leaves could be anything from a mouse to a wolf, and your brain defaults to assuming the worst. Medieval people knew the sounds of their forests. They could identify animals by movement patterns, distinguish between threat and non-threat. You can't tell the difference between a hedgehog bumbling through leaves and something preparing to eat you. There's a particularly unsettling sound that you keep hearing, a sort of huffing, snorting noise from somewhere in the darkness. Could be a deer, could be a boar, which would be genuinely dangerous, could be a badger, which would mostly ignore you unless cornered. You have no idea, and the not knowing is psychologically exhausting. Medieval people would either recognize the sound immediately or approach to investigate with appropriate caution. You're just sitting frozen, staring into darkness, trying to locate a threat you can neither see nor identify. Let's talk about what's actually dangerous in a medieval European forest at night, because your imagination is probably worse than reality. Wolves existed in medieval Europe, and they were a genuine concern, but attacks on humans were relatively rare. Most wolves avoided people, preferring easier prey. The real danger with wolves was that they'd steal livestock, which could devastate a medieval family economically. A lone traveler in the forest might encounter wolves, but usually they'd just watch from a distance and move on. Boars, tough boars, were legitimately dangerous. Wild boars are aggressive when surprised, powerfully built, armed with tusks that can disembowel you, and they have terrible eyesight which makes them startle easily. Medieval hunters considered boar hunting one of the most dangerous activities, and for good reason. A charging boar could kill an armed, experienced hunter. You, sitting in your shabby shelter with just a knife, you wouldn't stand a chance. The likelihood of a boar wandering into your camp is low but not zero. They're attracted to food smells, and while you don't have much food, you do have, well, you smell like food. Humans produce scents that travel far in still forest air. Medieval travelers would sometimes sleep in trees specifically to avoid ground-level predators like boars. You didn't think about this, so you're on the ground, hoping that whatever is making noises out there decides you're not interesting. Here's a quirky medieval belief that was actually somewhat practical. Fires keep animals away. This is partly true. Most animals are cautious about fire because it's unpredictable and dangerous. But it's not a perfect defense. A truly hungry or angry animal might ignore fire entirely. And some animals are actually curious about fire, attracted by the light or warmth. Your fire is protection, but it's not a force field. The bigger issue with nighttime in a medieval forest is the psychological toll. Hours and hours of darkness, unable to do anything productive, just sitting and waiting for dawn. Medieval people coped with this through routine. They'd sleep early, wake early, structure their lives around available daylight. But they also experienced long dark nights, especially in winter, and those nights were filled with storytelling, prayer, craft work by firelight, and a kind of meditative acceptance that you absolutely don't have. You're checking the time every few minutes, except you don't have a watch, so you're trying to estimate how long until dawn based on absolutely nothing. Medieval people told time at night through prayer hours matins. Lauds, primer by the position of stars if they could see them through the forest canopy. You can't see stars through the trees. You don't know the prayer schedule, and you have no idea if it's been 1 hour or 4 since sunset. The temperature is dropping steadily, and you're discovering that your fire isn't enough. One side of you is hot, almost uncomfortably so, while the other side is cold and getting colder. You're doing that medieval rotation again, turning like meat on a spit, but you can never get all of you warm at once. Medieval people had better clothing for this, layers of wool that insulated even when damp, heavy cloaks that could be wrapped completely around the body. Your modern outdoor gear is designed for different kinds of cold, not this specific combination of radiant heat on one side and freezing forest air on the other. You're also fighting sleep, because some part of your brain insists that sleeping is dangerous, that you need to stay alert for threats. Medieval people actually had a sleep pattern that's completely foreign to you. They'd sleep in 2 shifts, called first sleep and second sleep. They'd sleep for a few hours after dark, wake for an hour or 2 in the middle of the night to tend fires, check on livestock, or even socialize, then sleep again until dawn. This biphasic sleep pattern was normal for centuries. You're not doing thatury, just exhausted and fighting to stay awake, which is pointless. Eventually your body is going to demand sleep, and you're going to pass out whether you want to or not. But right now, fueled by adrenaline and fear, you're wide awake in the darkness, listening to every sound and imagining the worst. There's a scream in the distancia, genuinely horrifying sound, high-pitched and almost human. Your entire body tenses, and you're gripping your knife like it's going to help. Medieval people would recognize this sound immediately. It's probably a fox, or possibly a rabbit being killed by a predator. Foxes make disturbing screaming sounds, especially during mating season. Rabbits scream when caught by predators, and it sounds eerily like a human in distress. You don't know this, so you're convinced something terrible is happening out there in the dark. The scream doesn't repeat, and after several minutes of elevated heart rate, you're starting to calm down. But now you're hyper-aware of every sound, your nervous system on high alert, and this is going to be your state for the entire night. Medieval people had the benefit of familiarity. They knew what belonged in the night forest and what didn't. Everything is new and potentially threatening to you. Historians still argue whether medieval people were genuinely terrified of nighttime forests, or if the literary depictions of dark woods filled with dangers were more metaphorical than literal. The truth is probably both. There were real dangers, but the psychological and spiritual meanings of darkness were layered on top of practical concerns. A dark forest was dangerous because of wolves and bandits, but also because it represented chaos, sin, and the absence of God's ordered light. You're experiencing the practical fear without the cultural framework to process it. Here's what you're not experiencing that a medieval person would. The sounds of civilization. No church bells marking the hours. No distant sounds of a village settling down for the night. No dogs barking from nearby farms. The forest is isolated, and that isolation is profound. Medieval travelers in forests would navigate toward sounds of human habitation. You have no such sounds to guide you, no auditory landmarks. You're truly alone in a way that medieval people tried hard to avoid. Your fire is burning through wood faster than you anticipated, and you're facing a choice. Venture out into the darkness to gather more fuel, or let the fire die down and try to survive the night with less heat and light. Medieval people would have gathered wood during daylight enough for the entire night and then some. You didn't, so now you're paying the price. You decide to gather more wood, and this means leaving the safety of your fire circle. The moment you step beyond the firelight, you're effectively blind. Your eyes have been adjusted to the flames, and now the darkness is absolute. You're shuffling forward, arms outstretched like a zombie, feeling for branches on the ground. Every step could be onto uneven ground, into a hole, or onto something that bites. Medieval people with better night vision adaptation and intimate knowledge of their surroundings could navigate forests in darkness. You're helpless. You find a branch, grab it, and immediately get stabbed by a broken twig that goes right into your palm. Pain shoots through your hand, and you drop the branch, cursing quietly because making noise in the darkness feels dangerous. You're sucking on your palm where the wound is, tasting blood, and trying again. This time you're more careful, feeling the branch before grabbing it, and you manage to collect a few pieces of deadwood. The relief of getting back into the firelight is almost overwhelming. That brief excursion into darkness was psychologically exhausting, and you've only been gone maybe 2 minutes. Medieval night travelers who spent hours walking through dark forests must have had nerves of steel, or perhaps they were just so accustomed to it that the fear became manageable background noise rather than acute panic. You're feeding your newly gathered wood to the fire, building it back up, and you're thinking about the hours still ahead. If sunset was around 6 or 7, and sunrise isn't until 6 or 7 in the morning, you're looking at 12 hours of darkness. You're maybe 2 hours in. 10 more hours of this. The math is depressing. Medieval people filled nighttime hours with activities we'd find bizarre, talking to themselves, reciting prayers they'd memorized, doing crafts by firelight that probably ruined their eyesight. Some would whittle wood, creating spoons or bowls or simple tools. Others would mend clothing, though that's nearly impossible by firelight. Many would simply sleep, accepting that darkness meant rest time whether you were tired or not. You're trying to stay occupied, maybe arranging your firestones, maybe organizing your meager supplies, but there's only so much busy work available. Your mind starts to wander, and in the darkness and isolation, it wanders to weird places. You're thinking about every mistake you made today, every better choice you could have made. Medieval people experienced this too: the night thoughts, the anxiety spirals, the catastrophic thinking that comes with darkness and solitude. There's a sound closer to camp now, definitely closer, and it's rhythmic footsteps, but not human footsteps. Four-legged movement, fairly large. Your fire flares up from a piece of wood catching, and in the brief brightness you see eyes reflecting the light. Two eyes, golden green, about 3 feet off the ground, maybe 20 feet from your shelter. They're staring at you, unblinking. Your heart is hammering. Medieval people would try to identify the animal, the height of the eyes, the spacing, the color of the reflection all provide clues. You're just frozen, staring back at eyes in the darkness. The eyes shift, move slightly to the side, and then they're gone. Whatever it was has moved on, decided you're not interesting or not worth the risk. You're left wondering what you just saw and whether it's coming back. This is the medieval night reality. You share the forest with creatures you can't see, can't identify, and can't predict. They're going about their lives, and occasionally they intersect with yours. Usually it's harmless. Sometimes it's not. The uncertainty is the worst part, the not knowing whether to be terrified or just cautious. You're adding more wood to your fire, building it higher than necessary because light feels like safety even though you know it's an illusion. The fire is your world now, everything exists in relation to it. The area lit by flames is safe, known, controlled. The darkness beyond is chaos, mystery, threat. Medieval people lived with this binary every single night, and it shaped their entire worldview. Hours are passing, measured only by the number of times you feed the fire and the increasing stiffness in your muscles. You're trying different positions, sitting, lying down, half standing while leaning against a tree. Nothing is comfortable. Medieval people's bodies were adapted to this kind of discomfort, muscles and joints accustomed to hard surfaces and awkward positions. Your modern body, used to mattresses and ergonomic furniture, is in rebellion. You might doze off for a few minutes, jerking awake with panic when a log shifts in the fire. Then you're awake again, staring into darkness, listening to the forest, waiting for dawn. Medieval people did this, night after night, in all seasons. Winter nights were longer, summer nights shorter, but all of them were dark and all of them were long when you couldn't sleep. And here's the final psychological torture. You keep thinking you see the sky getting lighter, the first hints of dawn, but it's just your desperate imagination. Actual dawn is still hours away, but your brain keeps offering false hope. Medieval people knew the true signs of approaching dawn-specific bird calls, changes in forest sounds, subtle shifts in darkness quality. You're just guessing and being wrong. The night stretches on, eternal and dark, and you're learning why medieval people both feared and respected it. Darkness wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a fundamental challenge to survival, a test of nerves and endurance. You're failing that test, minute by minute, waiting for a dawn that's taking forever to arrive. Dawn is coming, finally, though you're so exhausted you almost don't care anymore. The first gray light is seeping through the forest canopy, and you're discovering what your body feels like after a night in a medieval forest camp. Spoiler, it feels terrible. Everything hurts. Your back is screaming from sleeping on uneven ground despite your bracken mattress. Your neck has a crick in it that makes turning your head painful. Your hips feel bruised from lying on your side all night because sleeping on your back meant staring up at the terrifying darkness. Medieval people woke up like this regularly, and they just went to work, plowed fields, chopped wood, walked miles to market. You can barely stand up. Here's what's happening to your modern body in this medieval environment. It's betraying you in ways you never imagined. Your muscles are cramping because you're dehydrated despite drinking water. You've been sweating from stress and exertion, losing electrolytes you have no way to replace. Medieval people got salt from their diet, from preserved foods and salted meats. You had some bark and pine needles. Your electrolyte balance is wrecked. You're trying to stand up straight, and your spine is not cooperating. It's making sounds, pops, cracks, grinding noises that are genuinely alarming. Medieval peasants had terrible backs by modern standards, compressed vertebrae and chronic pain from a lifetime of manual labor. You're getting a preview of that experience after just one night. The human spine isn't designed for sleeping on the ground. Not really. We can do it. We evolved doing it. But it's not comfortable and it's not healthy long-term. Your hands are the worst. Yesterday's blisters have broken. The raw skin underneath exposed. Your palms are smeared with dirt and probably infected, though the infection won't show up for a day or two. Medieval people developed thick calluses that protected their hands, layers of dead skin that absorbed punishment. Your soft modern hands are shredded. Every time you try to grip something, a branch to steady yourself, your knife, anything, the pain is sharp and immediate. Let's talk about joint pain, because you're discovering muscles and joints you didn't know you had, and they all hurt. Your knees are stiff from kneeling while building the fire, while working on the shelter, while doing basically everything close to the ground. Medieval people squatted differently than we. They had mobility and flexibility in positions that would cripple a modern person. You've been kneeling instead of squatting, and your knees are punishing you for it. Your shoulders are incredibly sore from the axe work, from building the shelter, from hauling branches. You've been using muscles that normally just hold your phone or type on a keyboard, and now they've been asked to do actual medieval labor. They're responding with deep, aching pain that painkillers aren't going to touch because you don't have painkillers. Medieval people managed this pain through sheer familiarity. Pain was just part of life, a constant background noise. You're not used to it, so it's overwhelming. Here's a fun detail about medieval physical hardship. People were shorter partly because of compression. Spinal compression from carrying heavy loads, from poor nutrition, from sleeping on hard surfaces all contributed to a loss of height over a lifetime. A medieval peasant might lose an inch or two of height between youth and old age just from their spine compacting. You've been in the forest for one day and you already feel shorter, like gravity has increased and is pressing you down into the earth. Your feet are their own special disaster. Medieval people wore simple leather shoes or went barefoot, and their feet were tough, adapted to uneven ground. Your modern feet, pampered by cushioned shoes and flat surfaces, are covered in hot spots that will become blisters if they haven't already. Every step on uneven ground sends jolts of pain up through your arches. You're walking like you're injured, which you basically are, and you have miles of forest to navigate if you're going anywhere. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced less pain because they were more accustomed to it, or if they just had better coping mechanisms and less expectation of comfort. The reality is probably both. Their bodies were adapted to hardship, but they also suffered tremendously and just considered it normal. Your experience right now, this full-body agony, would be a Tuesday morning for a medieval forester. Let's address the digestive situation, because your stomach is making sounds that could wake the dead. You ate basically nothing yesterday, and your body is deeply confused about this. Modern metabolisms expect regular feeding: breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. Medieval peasants often ate twice a day, sometimes once during hard times, and their bodies were adapted to irregular feeding. Your body is in minor panic mode, releasing stress hormones, breaking down muscle for fuel because there's no food coming. You're also experiencing what medieval people would call the gripes, intestinal cramping, and discomfort from drinking questionable water and eating random forest plants. Your digestive system is hosting a revolution. Various bacteria and possibly parasites setting up shop in your gut. The symptoms haven't fully manifested yet, but they're coming. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but you're going to pay for yesterday's water choices. Your mouth tastes like something died in it. Medieval dental hygiene was actually better than you might think. In some ways, people chewed on twigs to clean their teeth, used sage leaves as a sort of toothbrush, rinsed with water. But they also had terrible tooth decay from grain consumption, and many people had chronic mouth pain from abscesses and infections. You've got modern teeth but no way to clean them, and after one day your mouth is already developing that fuzzy feeling that's the beginning of plaque buildup. Here's something you're not experiencing yet but would be soon: vitamin deficiency. Medieval people got scurvy, night blindness from vitamin A deficiency, rickets from lack of vitamin D. These conditions took weeks or months to develop, but they were common enough that they were just considered normal afflictions. Your one day of bark eating won't cause deficiency diseases, but the trajectory is clear. If you stayed in this forest for weeks, you'd start experiencing medieval health problems. Your skin is suffering too. Small cuts and scrapes from yesterday are everywhere, in your arms from pushing through brush, on your legs from kneeling on rough ground, on your face from low-hanging branches you didn't see in the dark. Each one is a potential infection site. Medieval people died from infected cuts and wounds that we treat with a band-aid and antibiotic ointment. You're now vulnerable in the same way, and every scratch is a small lottery ticket for blood poisoning. The psychological exhaustion is almost worse than the physical pain. You didn't really sleep, you dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, never reaching deep rest. Medieval people were chronically sleep-deprived by modern standards, but they adapted to functioning on less sleep. You're not adapted. You're fuzzy-headed. Your reaction time is slow. Your decision-making is impaired. This is dangerous in an environment where good decisions are the difference between survival and disaster. Your eyes hurt in a weird way that's hard to describe. Medieval people lived by natural light cycles: bright sun, dim interiors, firelight, darkness. Your eyes are used to screens, artificial light, constant illumination. The combination of firelight last night and now the filtered forest dawn is straining your eyes in unfamiliar ways. You're squinting, blinking, rubbing at your eyes, which just makes them worse because your hands are filthy. Let's talk about the cold for a moment, because even though the sun is coming up, you're shivering. Your core body temperature dropped during the night, not dangerously, but enough that you're struggling to warm up. Medieval people knew to keep moving in the morning, to generate body heat through activity. You just want to sit by the fire, but the fire is dying because you're too tired to feed it properly. Your clothes are damp with dew and sweat, and damp clothes steal body heat. Medieval wool stays warm even when wet, which is why everyone wore it. Your modern fabrics are cold and clammy against your skin, and you can't just change into dry clothes because you don't have any. This dampness will stay with you all day unless you can dry by a fire, which requires maintaining a fire, which requires energy you don't have. Here's a quirky medieval morning routine that would help but that you don't know about. Vigorous movement to restore circulation. Medieval workers would stretch, swing their arms, walk briskly, essentially wake up their bodies after the night's stillness. You're just sitting there like a wounded animal, hoping the pain goes away on its own. It won't. Medieval people knew that movement created warmth and restored function. even when movement was the last thing you wanted to do. Your hunger is different now than it was last night. Last night it was acute, demanding, painful. This morning it's a deep emptiness, a hollow feeling that's almost nauseating. Your body has shifted into a different mode, still hungry, but more resigned, already starting to consume itself for fuel. Medieval people during famines experienced this progression from acute hunger to a kind of numbness where food stops being the only thought and becomes just another impossible thing. You try to stand up, really stand up, and your vision goes spotty. You're experiencing orthostatic hypotension, blood pressure dropping when you stand because you're dehydrated and undernourished. Medieval people would recognize this feeling. They'd call it the dizzying or the faintness, and they'd know to rise slowly, to steady themselves before moving. You didn't know this, so you stood up too fast and now you're grabbing a tree to keep from falling over. Every movement reveals a new ache. Reaching for a branch to feed the fire pulls on shoulder muscles that are tight and painful. Squatting to arrange the fire sends pain shooting through your quads and knees. Even breathing deeply hurts a little because you've been breathing shallow all night, tensed against the cold, and your intercostal muscles are cramped. Here's what medieval laborers would do now. They'd eat a morning meal: bread, pottage, maybe some cheese or dried fish, and the food would provide energy for the day's work. You have no meal. You have hunger, pain, and another full day of survival ahead of you. Medieval peasants worked through this kind of physical misery because they had no choice. You're discovering that no choice is a powerful motivator, but it doesn't actually make the pain go away. Your mental state is deteriorating alongside your physical state. You're irritable, everything annoys you, the birds are too loud, the morning light is too bright. The pain in your back is infuriating in a way that's out of proportion. This is what happens when you combine sleep deprivation, hunger, dehydration, and constant pain. You become a worse version of yourself. Medieval people experienced this, and it shows up in historical accounts of people snapping over small things, fights breaking out over trivial matters, because everyone was always operating at the edge of their capacity. You need to do something about your hands. They're going to get infected if you don't. Medieval people would wash wounds with clean water, sometimes wine if they had it, sometimes even urine in desperate situations because they'd observed that it prevented infection. The urea has mild antiseptic properties, though they didn't know why it worked. You're rinsing your hands in water that's probably not clean, dabbing at the broken blisters, and essentially hoping for the best. The morning is here. You survived the night, and you feel like you've been beaten with sticks. This is the medieval forest reality. Each day takes a toll on your body that accumulates, that compounds, that breaks you down a little more. Medieval people were tough not because they were fundamentally different from you, but because this constant physical challenge was normal for them. Their bodies were in various states of disrepair, but they kept going because stopping meant starving. You're looking at your hands, your shredded palms, your bruised knees, your everything that hurts, and you're understanding something fundamental. Medieval survival wasn't about one hard day. It was about day after day after day of this, with no end in sight, no rescue coming, no modern medicine to patch you up. Just the constant ache protocol, where pain is normal and your body is both your only tool and your greatest liability. Welcome to mourning in a medieval forest, where survival means carrying yesterday's damage into today's challenges, and where your modern body is learning that comfort was always a temporary luxury. You're moving through the mourning forest, trying to accomplish basic tasks, and you're starting to hear things that don't match what you're seeing. There's crashing in the underbrush about 50 yards away. Something large moving without much concern for stealth. Your medieval brain would process this information, efficiently assess the sound, identify the likely animal, determine threat level, respond accordingly. Your actual brain is just flooding with adrenaline and unhelpful panic. Here's the reality about wildlife in a medieval European forest. The animals sharing your space operated under completely different rules than the sanitized nature documentary version you're familiar with. These weren't creatures managed by park rangers, protected by conservation laws, or accustomed to humans as harmless observers. Medieval forest animals viewed humans as competitors, potential threats, or occasionally prey, and you, stumbling around exhausted and injured, are sending all the wrong signals. That crashing sound is getting closer, and now you can hear snorting heavy, wet breathing that sounds disturbingly large. Medieval foresters would already know what this is from the sound pattern alone. The weight of the footfalls, the particular quality of the breathing. You're frozen, trying to remember what you're supposed to do about wildlife encounters, which depends entirely on knowing what the wildlife actually is. A wild boar breaks into a clearing about 30 feet from you, and your first thought is that it's bigger than you expected. Way bigger. Medieval wild boar weren't the same as modern farm pigs. They were massive, muscular, covered in coarse hair, with tusks that curved up from powerful jaws. This one is maybe 300 pounds of bad attitude, and it spotted you. The boar stops, stares at you with small eyes that show no fear whatsoever, and makes a sound that's somewhere between a grunt and a growl. Medieval hunters called boar hunting the murderous art, because more hunters died pursuing boar than any other game animal. Kings and nobles hunted boar as a test of courage, and peasants avoided them whenever possible. You, with your little knife and your exhausted body, are exactly the kind of vulnerable target that makes a boar consider its options. Here's what you should do. According to medieval hunting wisdom, don't run. Running triggers a chase response, and a boar can run faster than you, especially through forest undergrowth where you'll be tripping over roots while it plows straight through. Don't make sudden movements. Boar have terrible eyesight but excellent hearing, and they respond aggressively to quick motion. Back away slowly. Make yourself seem large. Speak in a low, calm voice even though you want to scream. What you actually do is stand there like a statue, barely breathing, making eye contact with an animal that doesn't care about your fear. The boar snorts again, paws at the ground with one hoof, and then miraculously loses interest, turns and crashes back into the underbrush, moving away from you, probably more interested in rooting for food than dealing with a strange-smelling human. Your legs nearly give out from relief. Medieval people had encounters like this regularly, and most ended the same way: the animal moved on, crisis averted. But sometimes they didn't. Sometimes the boar charged, and then you were hoping you could climb a tree fast enough or that your spear would find the right spot before those tusks found you. You just got lucky, and you don't even fully understand how lucky. Let's talk about the other animals sharing this forest with you, because the boar isn't your only concern. Wolves are here, definitely here, though you haven't seen them. Medieval wolves were larger than modern European wolves, not yet reduced by hunting pressure and habitat loss. A wolf pack could take down deer, or even cattle when they raided farms. Would they attack a lone human? Rarely, but rarely isn't never, and medieval records include accounts of people being killed by wolves, especially in winter when food was scarce. The thing about wolves is their intelligence. They observe, they plan, they test. Medieval shepherds knew that wolves would watch flocks for days, learning patterns, waiting for opportunities. A healthy adult human with a fire and a weapon probably isn't worth the risk to a wolf. But you're not exactly healthy animorially injured, weak, moving awkwardly. Wolves can read that. They can identify vulnerable prey. You're hearing howls in the distance, that rising and falling chorus that's simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Medieval people had complicated relationships with wolves. They feared them, hunted them, used their fur, and included them in folklore and mythology. Wolves represented wilderness, danger, the untamed world beyond human control. Hearing them howl was a reminder that the forest belonged to them, not you. Historians still argue whether medieval wolf attacks were as common as folklore suggests or if they were rare events amplified by fear and storytelling. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Yes, wolves could be dangerous, but they were also convenient scapegoats for unsolved disappearances, and their threat was useful for reinforcing social control. Stay out of the forest or the wolves will get you. Kept peasants from poaching and children from wandering. There are smaller predators too, ones that wouldn't kill you but could certainly ruin your day. Foxes carrying rabies were a genuine threat. A rabid fox would approach humans fearlessly, bite, and transmit a disease that was 100% fatal once symptoms appeared. Medieval people recognized rabies. They called it madness or the fury, and they knew to avoid animals acting strangely. You probably wouldn't recognize the warning signs until it was too late. Badgers deserve special mention because they're deceptively dangerous. Medieval people knew that a cornered badger was vicious, that badger bites were severe, and that badgers would absolutely stand their ground rather than flee. You might stumble upon a badger set their den system without realizing it, and if a badger feels its home is threatened, it will come at you with surprising speed and ferocity. Those claws are designed for digging through hard soil. They'll go through your skin like butter. Then there are the deer, which seem harmless but actually aren't, especially during rutting season. A male red deer in autumn, full of testosterone and territorial aggression, can weigh 500 pounds and carries antlers that are literal weapons. Medieval hunters gave rutting stags a wide berth. They'd observed stags goring dogs, injuring horses, even killing humans who got too close. You see a majestic deer through the trees and think, nature is beautiful, while it's calculating whether you're a threat to its territory. Here's a quirky detail about medieval forest fauna. People believed animals could sense sin or guilt. A person with a clear conscience could supposedly walk among wild animals with less fear. This is nonsense, obviously, but it reveals something about medieval psychology. They thought the natural world responded to moral states, that animals were part of a divine order that punished wrongdoing. You're not worried about your sins, but you're definitely worried about that rustling in the bushes that just started up again. Birds are everywhere, and while they won't hurt you, they're creating an atmosphere of constant noise and movement that's exhausting to process. Every flutter could be something landing to investigate you. Every call could be a warning from one bird to others about your presence. Medieval people used bird behavior as information. Sudden silence meant a predator nearby. Certain alarm calls meant specific threats. You just hear noise. Let's talk about the apex predator that's actually still a factor in some medieval forests. Bears. European brown bears were more common then, living in dense forests where human activity was minimal. They're omnivores, generally avoid humans, but they're massive and powerful and unpredictable. A sow with cubs is extremely dangerous. A bear defending a food source will attack. And a hungry bear in late autumn, desperate to put on weight before hibernation, might consider you as a calorie source. You probably won't encounter a birthery rare even in medieval times, mostly relegated to the deepest forests. But the possibility exists, and medieval people knew this. They'd make noise while traveling, sing, talk loudly, anything to avoid surprising a bear. Surprising a bear at close range was one of the few guaranteed ways to get mauled. You're moving quietly, exhausted and focused on not falling over, which is exactly the wrong approach in bear country. The smaller mammals are almost worse because they're everywhere and some of them carry disease. Rats and mice are in the forest, living in the undergrowth, and they carry fleas, and those fleas carry plague. Medieval people didn't understand the disease vector. They blamed bad air or divine punishment, but they did observe that rats and sickness often occurred together. You're sleeping on the ground where mice run, potentially exposing yourself to all sorts of parasites and pathogens. Even the herbivores can be dangerous through indirect means. That deer trail you're following might lead to a Wallowa muddy depression where boar roll to cool off and remove parasites. The mud contains everything those boar carried: parasites, bacteria, viruses. Step in it, get it on your skin, especially on your broken blisters, and you're inviting infection. Medieval people knew which areas to avoid, which mud was clean and which was foul. Here's what's really unnerving about medieval forest wildlife: the lack of predictability. Modern animals in managed areas behave within expected parameters. Medieval forest animals were wild in a way we can barely comprehend. They'd never been conditioned by human presence, never learned to associate people with safety or food. They were purely instinctual, purely survival-focused. That made them dangerous not because they wanted to hurt you, but because they might decide you're a problem that needs solving. You're walking through territory that belongs to these animals, and they know you're here. The deer have scented you and moved away. The boar has decided you're not worth the effort. The wolves are aware of you but keeping their distance. The smaller creatures are just going about their business, unconcerned. But all of this could change in an instant. A wrong move, a sudden sound, stumbling into a den or nest, and suddenly you're not an observer but a participant in a violent encounter. Medieval people respected forest animals in a way that combined practical knowledge with supernatural belief. Animals were God's creatures, but also potentially demonic. A wolf might be just a wolf, or it might be a werewolf, a witch's familiar, a demon in animal form. This sounds silly until you're alone in the forest, exhausted and scared, and that wolf you hear howling starts to seem like more than just an animal. Your rational brain knows better, but rationality is hard to maintain when you're this vulnerable. The sun is higher now, and you should be feeling safer. Daylight is supposed to make the forest less threatening. But the wildlife doesn't care about day or night. That rustling could happen anytime. That boar could return. Those wolves might decide you're interesting after all. Medieval people lived with this constant low-level threat, this awareness that they shared the forest with creatures that could hurt or kill them. It shaped how they moved, how they acted, what they considered normal risk. You're checking over your shoulder constantly, scanning the trees, listening for sounds that don't belong. This hypervigilance is exhausting, burning energy you don't have, but you can't stop. Medieval people developed a kind of relaxed alertness, aware but not panicked, ready but not tense. You're all tension, all panic, and it's wearing you down as surely as the physical labor. One final thought about medieval forest animals. They were food, but they were also competition for food. That rabbit you're hoping to catch? A fox wants it too, and the fox is better at catching it. Those berries you're eyeing? Birds and deer are eating them, and they got here first. The forest ecosystem is a competition, and you're the weakest competitor, the one with the least knowledge and poorest tools. The animals aren't just threats, they're winning the survival game you're losing. Welcome to sharing the medieval forest with wildlife that doesn't care about you, doesn't fear you, and won't hesitate to defend itself or its resources. Every encounter is a roll of the dice, and eventually, your luck will run out. The sky is changing in a way that makes your stomach drop, even though you don't fully understand why yet. Those high, wispy clouds from this morning have thickened, forming a gray ceiling that's getting lower and darker. Medieval people could read, whether like you read a phone screen, they knew what each cloud formation meant, which winds brought rain, how the smell of the air changed before a storm. You just know that the sky looks angry and you're about to have a very bad time. Here's the fundamental truth about weather in a medieval forest camp. It's your primary enemy, more dangerous than wolves or boar or starvation. Weather kills efficiently and impersonally, and it's relentless in ways that animals aren't. A wolf might lose interest and wander off. Weather doesn't lose interest. It just keeps coming, hour after hour, until you're hypothermic, soaked, or both. The wind picks up first, and you're discovering that your shelter, that crooked wattle structure you were so proud of yesterday, is not windproof. Air is whistling through gaps you didn't know existed. The bracken roof is lifting slightly with each gust, and you're watching it with growing alarm because if that roof fails, you're completely exposed. Medieval builders knew to weigh down thatching with stones or logs, to interweave it tightly enough that wind couldn't get purchase. You didn't know this, so your roof is basically a sail waiting to catch the wrong gust. The temperature is dropping. You can feel it, that particular quality of cold that comes before rain. Medieval people dressed in layers, for thesa linen under tunic, a wool tunic over that, maybe a cloak or mantle on top. Wool is magical stuff. It insulates even when wet. It breathes. It's been keeping humans alive in harsh climates for thousands of years. Your modern synthetic outdoor gear is about to teach you a harsh lesson about moisture management, or rather, the lack of it. The first raindrops hit, fat and cold, splattering on the leaves above you with sounds like small drums. Within minutes, it's a proper rain, and your roof is leaking in exactly the places you feared, plus several you didn't anticipate. Water is dripping onto your bracken bedding, onto your firewood supply, onto you. Medieval thatching, done properly, could shed rain for hours. Your amateur attempt is failing in real time. You're scrambling to protect your fire, which is sputtering and smoking as raindrops hit the flames. Medieval people would have fire covers, leather or bark shields positioned to protect flames from rain while still allowing smoke to escape. You have nothing, so you're trying to build a hasty roof over your fire using bark pieces, which is sort of working but mostly just creating more smoke as the wet bark smolders. Here's what's happening to your body in cold rain. You're losing heat 25 times faster than you would in air of the same temperature. Water is an incredibly efficient conductor of heat, and wet clothing accelerates the process. Your modern jacket is soaking through those fancy water-resistant coatings only work for light drizzle, not sustained medieval downpours. Medieval people understood that staying dry was survival, that wet meant death in cold weather. You're learning this lesson in the worst possible way. Your fire is dying despite your efforts. The rain is intensifying, coming down in sheets now, and water is pooling around your fire pit because you didn't think to dig drainage channels. Medieval camps had sophisticated water management ditches directing rain away from living areas, fire pits with stone surrounds that elevated them slightly, bark gutters on shelter roofs. You have puddles and a sputtering fire that's producing more smoke than heat. The fire goes out completely, a final hiss of steam, and now you're in genuine danger. Without fire, you have no way to dry your clothes, no way to warm yourself, no way to make water safe. Medieval travelers carried fire-starting materials carefully protected in waterproof containers, maybe a fire horn with smoldering tinder, or flint and steel wrapped in oiled leather. Your flint and steel are soaked, and getting a spark from wet flint is exponentially harder than from dry. You're shivering now, that deep bone-shaking shiver that's your body's attempt to generate heat through muscle contractions. Medieval people knew this progression. First you shiver, then you stop shivering, and stopping is when you're really dying because it means your core temperature has dropped too far for your body to respond. The phrase "cold as death" had literal meaning. They'd found frozen bodies that looked peaceful, like they'd just gone to sleep. Let's talk about what rain does to a medieval forest. Trails become streams. Leaf litter becomes slippery mulch. Roots that were visible landmarks become hidden tripping hazards. The forest transforms into a different environment entirely, and navigation becomes treacherous. Medieval travelers would hole up during heavy rain, accepting lost time as preferable to injury or getting lost. You're stuck here anyway, watching water pool around your shelter, wondering if this is sustainable. Your clothing is completely soaked through now, plastered to your skin, and the wind is picking up again. Wind plus wet equals hypothermia at walking speed. Medieval people had strategies for this. Huddle in the driest spot available. Share body heat if with others. Keep moving to generate warmth if you can't shelter. You're alone. Your shelter is compromised, and movement in this rain seems pointless. You're making the classic mistake of just enduring, of hoping it will pass, when you should be taking active steps to survive. Historians still argue whether medieval people were tougher in dealing with weather or if they simply had better cultural knowledge about survival. The answer is probably both. They were more physically resilient, but they also had generations of accumulated wisdom about what to do when weather turned deadly. Red sky at morning. Shepherd's warning wasn't just a cute rhyme, it was meteorological prediction based on observation. You ignored the signs because you didn't know to look for them. The rain is finding every gap in your shelter, creating multiple leak points that are turning your interior into a shallow pool. Your bracken bedding is soaked, matted down, no longer providing any insulation. You're essentially sitting in cold water, feeling it wick into any remaining dry patches of clothing. Medieval people would abandon a failed shelter at this point. Seek better options, maybe a natural overhang, a hollow tree, even just a dense evergreen that might shed rain better than your wattle walls. You venture out into the rain, looking for alternatives, and immediately understand why medieval people feared traveling in storms. The rain is so heavy you can barely see 20 feet ahead. The wind is grabbing at you, throwing you off balance. The ground is slick with mud and wet leaves. You take 3 steps and nearly fall, catching yourself on a tree that's also slick with water. This is how people died, not from the rain itself, but from falling, getting injured, becoming unable to care for themselves and then succumbing to exposure. There's a large oak tree nearby with spreading branches that might offer some protection. You huddle against the trunk on the leeward side, and it's marginally better the canopy is catching some rain. The trunk blocks some wind. Medieval travelers used trees this way, calling them nature's shelters, though they also knew that trees in storms could drop branches or even fall entirely. Lightning was another concern, and while you're too miserable to worry about that right now, medieval people were terrified of lightning strikes during forest storms. Here's a quirky medieval belief that was actually somewhat practical. Sitting under oak trees during lightning storms was considered especially dangerous. They were right, though not for the reasons they thought. They believed oak attracted divine wrath. But actually, oak's deep roots make it a good conductor for lightning. Beech trees were considered safer, and indeed their shallower roots make them less likely to attract strikes. You're under an oak because it was closest, and you're adding lightning strike to your growing list of ways you might die today. Your core temperature is dropping steadily. You know this because your shivering is becoming less controlled, more spasmodic. Your fingers are clumsy, struggling to grip the tree bark. Your thoughts are getting foggy. This is the mental confusion that comes with hypothermia. Your brain's struggling to function as it gets colder. Medieval people recognized these signs. They had terms for the stages of cold death. The shivers, the muddle, the sleep. You're between shivers and muddle, and sleep is waiting if you don't do something. You need to move, to generate heat, but movement in this weather means getting wetter, which means getting colder. It's a paradox that medieval people navigated through experience. The trick is purposeful movement, not aimless wandering, but working toward a goal, building a better shelter, gathering materials, even just doing exercises in place. Movement creates heat, and heat is life, but only if the movement is efficient enough that you gain more heat than you lose to wet and wind. The rain continues, and you're starting to understand medieval prayers about weather. Lord, spare us from the storm. Blessed be dry land and roof overhead. These weren't just religious formulas, they were expressions of genuine terror about weather's power to kill. Medieval people had limited ability to predict weather and almost no ability to protect themselves from severe storms. They prayed because there was nothing else to do. You're attempting to restart your fire, fumbling with the wet flint and steel, but your hands are shaking too badly to strike properly. Even when you manage a strike, the sparks die immediately in the moisture. Your tinder bundle is soaked. Your kindling is soaked. Everything is soaked. Medieval people would have backup tinder stored in waterproof containers, multiple fire-starting methods, redundancy built into their survival systems. You have one method, and it's failing. Here's the reality of medieval cold rain. It didn't have to be freezing to kill you. Water at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, combined with wind, could cause hypothermia. The rain right now is probably in the high 40s, cold enough to rapidly drop your core temperature. Medieval people who fell into streams or got caught in cold rain could be dead within hours if they couldn't warm up. You've been wet for maybe an hour, and you're already in the danger zone. Your teeth are chattering so hard you're biting your tongue, tasting blood. Your muscles are cramping from the shivering. Your body is burning calories, desperately trying to stay warm, but you don't have calories to burn. Medieval people in your situation had one advantage. They were better nourished, with fat reserves to metabolize. You're already starving, so your body has less fuel for the thermogenic furnace. The psychological impact of cold rain is crushing. It's relentless, inescapable, and it makes you feel helpless in a way that's almost worse than the physical discomfort. Medieval people experienced this same despair. There are accounts of travelers simply giving up, sitting down in the rain and waiting to die because fighting seemed pointless. You're not at that point yet, but you can feel it out there, that moment of surrender. You're trying to fashion some kind of rain cover using bark and branches, creating a lean-to against the oak tree. Your hands are barely functional, fingers white and wrinkled from constant moisture. Medieval people would have worked through this. They had to. There was no rescue coming, but they had skills and muscle memory that made it possible. You're fighting your own incompetence alongside the weather. The wind shifts, and now rain is hitting you from a different angle, finding the gaps in your makeshift shelter. Medieval weather was a game of constant adaptation. When conditions changed, you changed with them or you died. There's no standing your ground against weather. You either flow with it, adjust, respond, or you become a casualty. Hours pass, you think hours. You've lost track of time, and the rain finally begins to ease. Not stopping, just lessening to a steady drizzle instead of a deluge. This is your window, the break you need to act. Medieval people would spring into action during these lulls, knowing another wave might come. You're so cold and exhausted that you can barely process this opportunity. You need fire. You need it more than food, more than anything. Fire means survival. You're searching for anything dry looking under logs, checking inside standing dead trees, peeling bark to find dry inner layers. There, finally some dry wood shavings from inside a dead standing tree, protected from the rain by thick bark. It's not much, but it's dry, and dry is precious. Your fire starting takes on desperate urgency. You're striking the flint with cramping hands, nursing tiny sparks into this precious dry tinder, blowing with blue lips, coaxing flames from nothing. Athena miracle actual fire. Small flames, barely there, but growing. You're feeding it with the driest materials you can find, building it up, and the warmth on your hands is almost painful as sensation returns. Medieval people knew that surviving weather was often about these small margins, finding the one dry spot, getting that one fire started, making it through the one storm. Weather tested everyone, noble and peasant alike. Your expensive outdoor gear gave you no advantage over medieval wool and leather. If anything, you're worse off because you lack the knowledge to work with what you have. The fire grows, you're warming up, and you're understanding that weather in a medieval forest wasn't an inconvenience, it was a constant, deadly threat that could kill you with nothing but water and wind. No wonder medieval people prayed about weather. No wonder they feared storms. No wonder they built their lives around staying dry and warm. You survived this one. The next storm might not be so kind. You're sitting by your hard-won fire, clothes slowly steaming as they dry, and something is happening to your mind that's harder to quantify than the physical suffering. The isolation is settling in, not as a sudden realization, but as a creeping certainty that's been building since you arrived in this forest. You're alone in a way that modern people almost never experience. No phone to check, no messages waiting, no possibility of contact with anyone. Medieval forest isolation was complete and absolute, and your 21st century brain is utterly unprepared for it. Here's what prolonged isolation does to human psychology. It strips away the social scaffolding that normally supports your sense of self. You are, in large part, defined by your interactions with others, your roles, relationships, the way people respond to you. Remove all that, and you're left with just yourself. No mirrors, No validation, no external reference points. Medieval hermits sought this experience deliberately, viewing isolation as a path to spiritual enlightenment. You're getting it involuntarily, and it's not enlightening, it's terrifying. Your internal monologue is getting weird. You've started talking to yourself out loud, having conversations where you play both parts. Need more wood? Yeah, I know. So go get it. In a minute. This isn't madness. Not yet. It's your social brain trying to maintain the patterns it's built for. Medieval people alone in forests did this too. They talked to themselves, to animals, to trees, to God. Anything to maintain the linguistic patterns that define human thought. The silence between sounds is oppressive in a way you never anticipated. In modern life, there's always ambient noise traffic, HVAC systems, other people, music, something. The forest has sounds, but they're separated by stretches of profound quiet that feel wrong to your urban-adapted ears. Medieval people were comfortable with silence, but they were never truly alone like this. Even a hermit had occasional visitors, contact with nearby communities. You have nothing, and the nothing is loud in its own way. Time is becoming meaningless, and this might be the most disorienting aspect of isolation. Without schedules, appointments, or time-marking devices, the day is just an undifferentiated stretch between sunrise and sunset. You think it might be afternoon, but you're not sure. Hours blend together. Medieval people marked time by prayer hours, by work rhythms, by the sun's position. You have none of these frameworks, so time is slipping away from you, unmeasured and unmeasurable. You're experiencing something medieval monks called aesthesia, a kind of spiritual despair mixed with listlessness. They considered it a dangerous state, a temptation from demons that made you unable to care about anything. Modern psychology might call it depression or apathy brought on by isolation and stress. Whatever you call it, it's settling over you like a heavy blanket. Tasks that seemed urgent this morning now feel pointless. Why gather more wood? Why fix the shelter? Why bother? Here's a quirky medieval approach to combating isolation-induced despair. Structured routine. Monks had their prayer hours. Laborers had their work patterns. Even hermits maintained schedules of devotion and basic tasks. The routine provided purpose when motivation failed. You have no routine, so you're floating in purposelessness, and it's psychologically corrosive. Your memories are starting to feel unreal, like they happened to someone else. Did you really have a different life? Modern conveniences, comfortable bed, regular meals, these seem like fantasies now. Stories you made up to comfort yourself. This is a known psychological phenomenon in extreme isolation. The present becomes so overwhelming that the past feels fictional. Medieval people probably experienced this too, though they'd attribute it to spiritual trials or demonic influence rather than psychology. The fear is different now than it was on the first night. Then it was acute, focused on specific threats, animals, darkness, immediate danger. Now it's existential, a deep unease about your continued existence. Not, will that sound in the bushes kill me? But, will I just cease to be out here, erased from the world with no one knowing? Medieval people had religious frameworks for these fears. God was watching. Death led somewhere. Suffering had meaning. You have no such comfort. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced mental health crises differently due to their religious worldview, or if the same psychological patterns emerged just with different interpretations. A medieval person having a breakdown might blame demons or divine punishment. You're blaming isolation and stress. The experience might be similar even if the explanations differ. You're making up companions in your head, which is both disturbing and oddly comforting. You've named a particularly ugly tree near your shelter Bernard, and you're greeting it when you pass. There's a bird that keeps returning to the same branch, and you've decided it's checking on you, though it's obviously just hunting insects from that perch. Medieval people did this too. They personified nature, saw intention and personality in animals and plants. Part religion, part psychology, part desperate need for connection. The lack of purpose is eating at you. In modern life, even mundane activities have purpose. You work for money, clean for hygiene, cook for nutrition. Here, everything is just survival, and survival alone doesn't feel like enough purpose to sustain motivation. Medieval people had cosmic purpose built into their worldview. Suffering was redemptive. Labor was prayer. Existence itself was service to God. You're just existing, and it's not enough. Your sense of identity is fragmenting. You keep thinking, I wouldn't normally do this about basic survival tasks, but then realizing you don't know what normal you would do because normal you doesn't exist anymore. The person who started this journey yesterday feels like a stranger. Medieval people probably didn't experience this particular fracture because they had more stable identities rooted in fixed social roles, but transformation through ordeal was a common theme in their literature and religion. Let's talk about the intrusive thoughts, because they're getting worse. Your brain is offering up helpful suggestions like, you could just walk into the forest and keep walking until you can't walk anymore. Or that cliff edge you passed falling would end this quickly. These aren't suicidal ideation exactly, more like your exhausted mind exploring all possible exits from an intolerable situation. Medieval people called these temptations of despair, and they fought them with prayer and willpower. The isolation is making small problems feel catastrophic. Your shelter's roof is still leaking in places irritating, but fixable. Your fire is burning successful, even. You're alive technically winning, but your isolated brain is interpreting everything as disaster, finding threats everywhere, catastrophizing minor setbacks. Medieval people had communities to provide perspective, to say, this is normal, this is manageable. You have no perspective but your own spiraling thoughts. You're starting to lose your grip on what's real and what's imagination. Was that sound actually a wolf? Or did you imagine it? Did you drink water an hour ago or 4 hours ago? The boundaries are blurring. Medieval people attributed this confusion to spirits or enchantments. The forest was magical. Reality was fluid. It's just exhaustion and isolation breaking down cognitive function. But knowing doesn't make it less disturbing. Here's what medieval hermits and forest dwellers did to maintain sanity. They created structure, maintained faith, had a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Hermits were serving God. Charcoal burners were making a living. Outlaws were evading justice, which at least gave them a goal. You have no structure, no faith framework, no purpose. You're just enduring, and humans aren't built for purposeless endurance. The fantasy of rescue is becoming obsessive. You keep imagining someone finding you, taking you back to civilization, ending this ordeal. Medieval people in distress would pray for divine intervention, for saints to guide rescuers, for miraculous salvation. Your fantasies are secular but serve the same psychological function. Theory escape valves for unbearable reality. The difference is that medieval people believed their prayers might work. You know your fantasies are just fantasies. Your emotional regulation is shot. You go from calm to tearful to angry in minutes, for no clear reason. The isolation removes the social feedback that normally helps modulate emotions. Medieval people would have similar swings, though they'd interpret them through humoral theory too much black while causing melancholy. An imbalance of humors affecting temperament. Different explanation, same experience. You're talking to yourself more frequently now, and the conversations are getting elaborate. You're explaining your situation to an imaginary audience, narrating your actions, arguing with yourself about what to do next. This is your social brain desperately maintaining the patterns it evolved for. Medieval hermits did this so consistently that it became formalized as contemplative practice dialogues with God, with saints, with their own souls. Structure imposed on the chaos of isolation. The nights are worse. Daytime at least offers tasks, distractions, the visual confirmation that you exist in a real place. Nighttime is formless, timeless, and your mind fills the darkness with terrors both real and imagined. Medieval people had prayers for nighttime protection, rituals to ward off night demons. These served psychological functions. The ritual itself was calming. The belief in protection was comforting. You have neither ritual nor belief, just raw fear and spiraling thoughts. Here's a genuinely concerning development. You're losing motivation for basic survival tasks. The fire needs feeding, but you're sitting here staring at it instead of getting wood. You're thirsty, but walking to the stream feels overwhelmingly difficult. This is dangerous. Medieval people who gave up on basic tasks didn't last long. The forest doesn't care about your mental state. It just keeps demanding effort, and if you stop providing it, you die. You're experiencing what modern psychology calls learned helplessness. When enough things go wrong, you stop trying to fix anything because effort seems futile. Medieval people probably experienced this too, especially during famines or plagues when survival felt like random chance rather than something you could influence. The difference is they had community support to snap them out of it. You have nothing but your own fading willpower. The isolation is teaching you something that medieval people knew instinctively. Humans aren't meant to be alone. We're social creatures, built for tribes and communities. Everything about your psychology is designed for interaction, cooperation, shared experience. Strip that away, and the system starts malfunctioning. Medieval hermits who successfully lived in isolation did so by replacing human community with divine communion. You have no replacement, just a void where connection should be. Your survival at this point depends less on physical capability and more on mental resilience. And your mental resilience is crumbling. The forest isn't just testing your ability to build shelter or start fires, it's testing whether your mind can endure isolation, uncertainty, and purposelessness. Medieval people who survived long-term forest living either went mad, found purpose in their isolation, or maintained enough human contact to stay psychologically grounded. You're losing this test. Your mind is fracturing under the pressure, your motivation evaporating, your sense of self dissolving. The forest is still just the forest trees. Animals, weather, neutral and indifferent. But your medieval forest camp has become a prison of isolation. And the bars are built from your own psychology failing under conditions it was never designed to handle. The fire crackles, you're still alive, and your mind is screaming in the silence that somehow everything would be easier if you just stopped trying. Medieval people called this the dark night of the soul, and it claimed countless lives in isolated forest camps across Europe. Welcome to the final test. The one you can't build or forage or fight your way through the test of whether your 21st century mind can survive medieval isolation. Probably can't. The fire is warm now, steadier than before, and its light pushes gently against the gathering dusk. You're still here, still breathing, still existing in this small circle of warmth that you've fought so hard to maintain. The forest around you is settling into its evening rhythms, birds finding roosts, the day shift of animals giving way to those who own the night. There's a rhythm to it all, ancient and indifferent, but somehow less threatening now that you've survived this long. Your body aches, your mind is weary, but you're learning something that medieval people knew in their bones. Survival isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. Every small task completed, every fire kept alive, every night endured is its own quiet victory. The forest doesn't ask for excellence, only for effort, and somehow you've provided enough effort to still be here as another day fades. The darkness is coming again, but this time you know what it holds. Not certainty, not safety, but familiarity at least. The sounds will be the same sounds. The fears will be manageable fears. And the morning will eventually come because it always does. Medieval people measured their lives in these small cycles, day into night, night into day, each one a separate negotiation with survival. Your fire is burning, casting dancing shadows that are almost friendly now. The smoke rises into the darkening sky, a thin thread connecting your small human struggle to the vast indifference above. You're alone, yes, but you're also here, still part of the living world, still counting among those who haven't given up. Rest now. Let the forest have its night. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but tomorrow is not yet here. For now, there's only this warmth, breath, the quiet persistence of being alive. Sleep, if sleep will come. The fire will keep watch, and morning distant but certainties waiting beyond the darkness.